Okay, let me go ahead and we have some others joining us, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Good morning. My name is Crystal Pruitt, and I am the Family Support Coordinator for the Second Alarm Project, and we are excited for you to join us for our webinar with Dr. Canto on overcoming overwhelm. Dr. Canto is a licensed psychologist and the owner of Southeast Behavioral Health located in Tallahassee. Dr. Canto was previously on a faculty at Florida State University, but chose to return to clinical practice where her passion truly lies. In her practice, Dr. Canto and her team of 5 providers work with clients of all ages, addressing a wide variety of mental health concerns using a strength-based integrated model of care. Dr. Canto is particularly passionate about working with first responders with over 20 years of experience in settings that range from private practice to schools, hospitals, child welfare, and college campus clinics. Dr. Canto brings a wealth of knowledge to her clinical work. Welcome, Dr. Canto.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's good to see everyone. I am going to turn off the chat. Crystal, is it okay if you or Brandy monitors the chat and just let me know if somebody wants me to hold up or something?
Yes, we can take care of that.
Okay, I'm not great at multitasking in that way. So, okay. All right, it's great to see everybody. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you so much, Crystal. As she mentioned, I am a psychologist here in Tallahassee, Florida, and I am absolutely delighted to be here and to present to you guys. With Second Alarm Project serving so many first responders and their families, it is just such a critical resource, especially as we're talking about overwhelm, stress, PTSD even, and just the management of all of these situations. So I really want to thank Crystal and Dr. Kelly O'Dare and Second Alarm Project for inviting me to speak today. This is near and dear to my heart. My husband is a retired law enforcement professional himself. He's worked at 2 different agencies, and we learned some of this information, not only professionally, obviously, but we learned it firsthand with what he was going through and the impact that it had on our family. So this is very near and dear work to me. And it's not just theoretical, this is lived experience. So I just want you to know that I'm coming from a place of understanding there. If you are on the call today and if you have any questions, if you'll go ahead and put it in the chat, I can speak easily for 3+ hours. I used to teach long classes and I can go on and on and on, but Crystal's going to help me stay honest, and she's going to let me know when I have a couple of minutes left over. So we will leave plenty of time for questions or just comments and things like that. So my understanding is that we have a range of folks on the call today, from first responders, family members, and professionals that work with first responders, and not all just in Florida. I understand that we've got some folks from out of state as well. So welcome to everybody. One of the things that I want to do today is just provide an overview of mental health struggles that are common in first responders and families. None of this should be shocking news. I'm sure if you've been in this community for very long, you've seen some, if not many, of these reactions or experiences yourself. So I want to just kind of provide an overview of that. It was an interesting experience. I think folks that marry first responders after they're first responders, I think that experience is slightly different. This is just my own theory and hypothesis, than marrying someone and them going into a first responder community. My husband was always law enforcement from the day I met him to we've now been married 26 years, and he's been, he's had that persona, he's had some of those quirks, he's had a lot of that experience since the whole time. It wasn't a situation where we were dating and he was one way and then just subtly changed over time. Like, this was always the man that I married. So I do think there are some subtle differences. We're not going to go too terribly much into that today, but I do think that that's worth noting, that some of this looks a little bit different when you're in a relationship with someone, or if you're a first responder yourself and you're in a relationship and you're interacting, and those interactions change over time as you kind of go through it. So I think that that's just worth noting. And then we're going to talk about, how do we actually work on these issues? How do we recognize that we're having challenges? What those challenges might look like. So some of them I know you already know, but some of them might be a little sneaky for us. And how do we work on the issues such that we can continue to do our jobs, continue to be functional in our families, and do the best that we can do in those areas. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. I can talk forever, and and I will keep doing so unless I know that there's some questions to be answered. So I appreciate each and every one of you. Um, all right, so I am a very active lecturer, teacher, whatever. So I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things. If you will go ahead and get either a sheet of paper and a pencil ready, or just get your phone and the notes app on your phone. I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things in a second, okay? Um, all right, there we go. Is that going to work? Can you see my next slide, Crystal? Excellent, very good, thank you. All right, so, well, we already did that. Look at that, we're moving right along, guys. All right, so first thing is I want to kind of think about your role on the call today, right? So why did you decide to attend this particular session? My understanding is that Second Alarm puts on lots of really cool webinars, lots of engagements for families to get together, for professionals to get together. What about this particular topic made you want to attend? So I just want you to think about these things, and then I'll tell you when I want you to write a couple things down. And just think about, do you have any current challenges, things that are weighing heavily on your mind? Is there stuff going on at work? Is there stuff going on in family? Is there something else? Right? So we're going to do a little state of your union activity. Okay. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to get your piece of paper and a pen or your notes app. And I want you to first, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being maximum, 1 being minimum, I want you to rate how overwhelmed you're feeling this week. This week starting like Monday of last week, okay? Since we're doing this on a Monday. So just take a moment. How overwhelmed are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 5? All right, and I hope you're actually doing this. This will be more helpful if you do it. All right. Now, I'm going to set a timer for 1 minute. I'm getting my timer app on my watch here going. I'm going to set a timer for 1 minute, and I want you to free write on your piece of paper or on your notes app. You can delete it or shred it later. I want you to free write some of the top things that are weighing on your mind this week, okay? Things that are contributing to more than just minimal levels of stress. So what are the biggies, right? So I'm going to set that timer and go. Yeah, 1 minute. All right, 30 seconds left. What are some of the biggies? It's okay to add a few details. Nobody's going to see this but you, and I will not ask you to share out. 10 more seconds. All right, time. Very good. So just answer in your head. Again, we don't need to share out loud. Look down your list of things that you wrote about, okay? Were some of them work related? Were some of them family related? Maybe money, maybe relationship. Maybe even you wrote some good things coming up. Maybe you got some plans coming up for Labor Day weekend. I don't know. Sometimes good things are stressful too. We call that eustress, EUSTRESS, right? So even good things can be a little bit stressful if you got to figure out, like, what am I taking for food and things like that, right? So when we're kind of looking at the state of your union, I want you to think about just putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard. I can talk, I promise. This can be a powerful first step in kind of really organizing your thoughts around what it is that's causing us stress. Too often, each of us goes through our day just handling. We're just handling. And what we don't do a great job of doing is just taking a moment to take a step back and go, all right, what is it that's going on, right? What is it that's got me reacting the way I do? What is it that's got me wound up? What is it that's got me excited if it's a good thing, right? Notice I didn't give you 30 minutes. Typically, 1 minute is all that you need to really hone in on some of the heaviest things that are weighing on your heart, right? And even 1 minute might have been too long for some folks, right? Because it was really easy to point to one thing or another. Um, so it's a great first step to just kind of organize your thoughts and take that 20,000-foot level of what's going on here, what's going on in my world, okay? Um, so this is step one, identifying the biggest challenges that you're working on, and then we can rally our faculties around reducing some of what's challenging about that situation. And I don't know how sensitive my microphone is, so if you can hear some background noise, I apologize. I'm doing this in my home office because we have more consistent Wi-Fi, oddly enough, than in my work office. So I apologize if you're hearing background noise. All right, so state of your union, about you, so reason why you came to this presentation. And now, my computer, there. All right, so this is a quote by a neuroscientist that works on, studies the effect of trauma on our brains. And I'm gonna have to move this so I can read it myself. Okay. Our military and our first responders are highly trained to be in abnormal events, so they have normal, for them, responses to be able to survive battle. And even with all that training, they cannot be inoculated by post-traumatic stress. Okay. I think that's really important. We're going to talk a little bit today about some of the unique stresses that first responders go through. But we also, as family members and as folks working with first responders, we have to remember that what seems shocking to us might not be as shocking to the first responder. And first responders, you have to remember that what is shocking to you may differ vastly from what's shocking to your family member or your friends. And even within peers at work, right? So you could go to a call or show up to an event and something bothers you particularly and it doesn't bother another peer that's with you. Trauma is very subjective. Stress can be very subjective. There's some broad things that affect all of us, but a lot of the training for first responders is really to help be able to respond in situations safely and with enough planning to be able to do what they need to do. The problem is that doesn't translate very well into the outside world or in the home life, right? Sometimes it does, but not great, right? And so being able to code switch between those situations, we're not surviving, hopefully we're not surviving battle at home, although sometimes it can look like it. But at work and being able to be on call and being able to understand scene safety and to understand your own safety, like that's just a lot going on. And so first responders have to really be trained, but that doesn't mean stuff doesn't bother them. And we're going to talk about the long going exposure to chronic stress. Even if one particular call wasn't particularly stressful, it's just the accumulation of call after call after call. Or if you're having, a downshift for some reason, then all of a sudden getting a large call, that's a big change for our nervous system too. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Again, feel free to put some comments or some questions in the chat, and I'd love to go over them at some point. Okay. So today's focus is recognizing the signs of stress and overwhelm. We're going to talk about some practical coping mechanisms and provide some resources. First, I want you to kind of think for yourself, whether you're a family member or you're a first responder or a professional that works with first responders. I want you to take a moment and ask yourself, how do you know when you're getting overwhelmed? One of the things I do in my practice is I do pre-employment evaluations for law enforcement as well, for psychological screenings. And that's a question I frequently, if not constantly, ask is how do they know when they're getting overwhelmed? Because if you don't know you're getting stressed or overwhelmed, then that's a problem in and of itself. So what are your tells? I think they use that phrase in poker, right? I don't play poker, but what are your tells? How do you know when you're getting stressed and overwhelmed? Are you irritable? Are you angry? Maybe do you withdraw a little bit? Do you distract yourself unproductively on the phone a lot? maybe some substance use. So just recognizing your own signs of stress. And then we're going to go through a whole lot more in a little bit. And so you can see, the range of different things. Okay. Um, in terms of the practical coping mechanisms, I think it's also helpful to start with you. So a lot of this is about you, right? We can't help other people and our family members and our peers if we don't know ourselves, right? So let's start with you again. What are the coping mechanisms? What are the things that you do now? And I'd love it if you wrote it down on your sheet of paper on your notes app. What are the things that you do now that are helpful? What are the things that you do that are unhelpful? We all have them. We all have them. I assure you I do too. Okay. My husband would probably point them out quicker than I would, but I assure you I have them too. Okay. So, what are those productive and unproductive things that you're doing? So, just take a couple of seconds. All right. And one of the things that I want to just emphasize as we're going along is these signs and these ways of coping, they're your attempt to get through a sticky situation. They're not good or bad necessarily. They're just adaptive or not adaptive, right? So we talk about things in moderation. A little bit of distraction is not a terrible thing. If you're distracting constantly and not able to get back on task, then that becomes problematic. So we're going to talking about things that calm your nervous system, but in ways that are a little bit more adaptive for you in the long run. All right. All right. So challenges for first responders and families. This is the stuff that I bet you could have made this list without any of my help whatsoever, right? So let's talk about the first responders themselves first, right? So exposure to trauma, that kind of goes without saying. You are the first on the scene to whatever it is. And back in the day, one of the jobs I used to have is I used to work in a hospital. And we used to say my husband saw it on the street and then I saw it when it got to the hospital. But I have to admit, when it got to the hospital, so I worked in trauma, and when it got to the hospital, it was already sort of cleaned up a little bit. I have to admit that. It was still a hot mess, don't get me wrong, but that's very different than being on scene. On scene is more chaotic, right? So just that exposure to trauma. And anytime that trauma hits a little close to home, it has the potential for being more triggering for us. I know at the hospital, especially once I had my first kid, anytime a kid of a similar age came through, I had some challenges. And I will say, kind of backing up to what I said earlier, knowing your own tells. It was my boss at the hospital that taught me my biggest tell. She was like, I speak forever. I'm an emotional person. I wear my heart on my sleeve. She taught me that when you shut down and you start talking black and white, it's stressing you. And I was like, I've never forgotten that. I know that when I start over intellectualizing something, it's because it's bothering the snot out of me. So that's one of my tells. Okay. So that regularly witnessing either death or pain or violence or accidents or disasters, that repeated exposure is one of the most obvious challenges for the first responders, right? Shift work is another one. The time that my husband spent on night shift, whew, that was a doozy, right? It was great well, was it great? Gosh, I don't know if it was great. I don't know if I could say it was great. It was good. 4 and 5 days off were kind of nice, but the 5 days on, working midnights, that was a challenge. Our bodies aren't exactly meant to be up overnight, and yet for first responders, we have to have a community of first responders that can respond overnight. So just the nature of shift work, irregular hours, working at hours that our body isn't really meant to be up. I know that it got to a point where with my husband's own sleep challenges, that if I used to joke that if a toad farted outside, he was going to wake up. He was just so responsive. So using a lot of blackout curtains and noise reductions and things like that. But that can produce an ongoing challenge. And for any of you guys that have not had regular sleep, even new moms, just a baby keeping you up, after a period of disrupted sleep, our emotion regulation is challenged. Our ability to handle situations is challenged. Our ability to manage overall stress and planning is challenged. So that shift work can be challenging too. Some high pressure situations, a lot of the stuff that first responders and their families are having to deal with is just chronic having to respond to high pressure situations, life or death decision making. That's a lot. That's a lot of weight on a first responder's shoulders. There's a lot of second guessing. I could have done this. I could have done that. Maybe I should have done this. We don't know, right? And so we can only do what we're doing in the moment and then retrain as necessary. But we can't armchair quarterback every event that we've been involved in. Some dangerous environments. This is true for first responders, obviously, but even sometimes that's going to kind of bubble over into the families. My husband had a strict rule that we couldn't post anything online about our kids. He didn't wear his wedding ring. Well, probably still doesn't wear his wedding ring, but for years and years, he didn't want people to know he had a family. He didn't want that bubbling over at home. And in one of the agencies he worked with, they were able to bring their patrol cars home, and people were starting to do things to the patrol car sitting in our driveway. We came out one time and the tires were slashed, and people would mess with the house and stuff like that. So it can bubble over. It's not just the first responder, but that dangerous environment can bubble over a little bit too. Um, just the lack of predictability is in of itself. Are any of you guys kind of going through and going, yep, 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 yep? Totally understandable if you are, right? But the lack of predictability is a problem. Uncontrollable situations, just response mode, right? There, not a lot of what you do is planning. It's just you're having to respond on scene. Public scrutiny, right? That's a big problem too. There's a lot of issues with people either having negative views of the first responder community, having negative views of the contracts, the ways in which first responders are compensated. There's just a lot of public scrutiny around a very public service, and that's important in the way that we receive that criticism and we receive that media coverage. There's also a culture, right? And I want to talk about this in just a little bit more detail in a moment, but there's there's an emotional suppression culture. Like in first response, your job is to handle your job, right? And you can't do that if you're emoting all over the place, right? If you're having a major emotional reaction. I mentioned earlier, I'm emotionally expressive, but when I'm responding to acute crisis, that goes out the window, and it needs to go out the window for a little while, right? Because I need to be able to respond. First responders need to be able to respond. But that pressure to maintain that tough attitude can be really challenging when it comes time to having to express difficult emotions. And that expression is one of the ways we build resilience and we build healing after chronic stress. So it's really important. Um, that emotional suppression, I've noticed a slight shift in the newer folks that are coming on as I'm doing the pre-employment screenings for law enforcement. I've noticed that there seems to be a slight paradigm shift that's happening. The younger generation seems to be a little bit more open to mental health than older generations, and I've found that interesting and probably is going to be really important in the long run. Um, but then afterwards, just overall burnout, right? And I apologize for any dispatchers on the call. I don't have a dispatcher picture, and I should have put one up there because we're going to talk about dispatchers here in a moment too. But the overall exposure to stress in a prolonged sort of way, without sufficient recovery time, just produces ideal environment for burnout. Do you need more? My goodness, I've got at least two more, and then I would love to see if you guys have any additional that maybe I missed. Um, a little bit about moral injury. So having to do things that maybe you don't feel like is the right thing to do in a situation, or witnessing or being part of a situations that you feel might interact with your morals and in a contradictory way. That can be problematic. Or seeing, multiple viewpoints in a situation, that can be problematic as well. And then last but not least, the physical strain. These jobs are demanding, right? So not only the ones that are responding and on the street, but dispatchers have to sit in one seat for hours and hours on end, and ask for breaks. And that's a whole another stress as well. So there are physical demands no matter what these roles are, right? All right, I'm going to open it up for a second. Did I miss any? Anyone? Crystal, you're shaking your head no. You feel like I got them all?
So,
I think one more I would add in retrospect is financial challenges. None of you guys went into this for the money, right? I think I would add that too. These aren't typically the highest paying professions. So in retrospect, I might add that one as well. All right. Okay, so we're going to get to family members in just a minute, but I kind of want to stick on this on this stress aspect. And we're going to talk about burnout, chronic stress, and PTSD. We're going to start with PTSD at the very top. Um, and I'm not trying to make psychologists out of any of you guys. And I know you know some of the broad signs and symptoms probably of PTSD, but there is a diagnostic criteria. Um, with the diagnostic criteria, we've been able to accumulate some statistics in how many of each profession would qualify for a diagnosis of PTSD. And so just take a look at this list for a second. Right. So hopefully it jumps out at you that the general population is significantly less, right? You guys are in these chronic, dangerous situations and having to respond. That obviously elevates the experience of or the potential for PTSD. I thought it was interesting initially to talk to folks about, hey, paramedics and dispatchers, they have a high rate of prevalence of PTSD as well. And people seem to be a little bit more shocked. Like, I don't think the firefighters and the law enforcement shocks people, but then look at the paramedics and dispatchers, and I think people are a little bit more surprised by that. I'm not, right? So, paramedics and dispatchers, a lot of times your job is to stabilize a situation or to get additional help there, but you don't really ever find out how the story ends. That's very stressful. With firefighters and law enforcement, a lot of time you see how the story ends, right? But with paramedics and EMTs, it's that stabilization. With dispatchers, like you're getting the chaos of the call, you're getting resources dispatched, and then you don't necessarily find out what happened afterwards. That's very stressful for our nervous system, right? So it just one thing to keep in mind that everybody in the first responder community is prone to PTSD. General population being 6 to 7%. All right, so again, not trying to make psychologists out of all of you, but some of the general diagnostic criteria for PTSD. This is what your clinicians are looking for if they're going to diagnose it. Everybody's got the first one. Not everybody, nearly everybody. Exposure, right? That's an exposure to a life-threatening event. That's just by the nature of the job. I will tell you also that exposure can be vicarious, right? So the dispatchers, the family members who hear about the hard stories at home, that vicarious traumatization, that's also an exposure. So just keep in mind that it doesn't always have to be in person. It can be vicariously too, right? One of the other criteria is having some version of re-experiencing. Sometimes it can be nightmares, it could be flashbacks, some emotional distress after exposure, just rethinking about it. Some thinking about what happened is not a bad thing. And I don't want to, we say in our world, don't pathologize the normal, meaning having a reaction to a crisis is normal. Matter of fact, not having one might be a sign of something going on, right? But having some thoughts afterward is normal. Being able to process an event. One of the worst things we can do is put it in a box and put it on a shelf. I promise you at some point that shelf will tumble down, right? So re-experiencing in some ways, but this is a persistent re-experiencing, an unwanted re-experiencing of the event. And just having some reactivity around that. Some of that again is normal in terms of just our biology. And in fact, it takes a fair amount of training to get first responders to not be as reactive to situations. You guys have to go through a lot of training for that. But just something again to keep in mind, and that re-experiencing in a negative, unwanted way. Okay. Another criteria for diagnosis of PTSD is avoidance. That could be trying to avoid the reminders, not going to a particular intersection because that's where something happened, or avoiding work. Sometimes avoiding work can be a situation, or trying to avoid thoughts related to it. No, I don't want to talk about it. right? I had a bad day. No, I don't want to talk about it. One of the worst days, my husband had quite a few bad days in law enforcement, but one of the worst days was actually his very last day in law enforcement. And and that was unfortunate because that's how he ended his career. He lost someone that he was working on, and that was a really hard way to end the career, right? But the whole I don't want to talk about it is not a sustainable strategy. Now there are certain people we shouldn't be talking to about it, and that's understandable. But a global I don't want to talk about it is not useful. Um, Another of the criteria is just persistent negative thoughts. Not able to experience a positive mood, feeling isolated, withdrawing, overly negative thoughts about oneself could be part of that. Uh, Go ahead. Somebody about to say something? All right. And then having some increased arousal around it. That's that irritability or that hypervigilance. Some of that, again, I don't want anyone to go home and start, diagnosing their loved one or diagnosing themselves, but some of that is actually built in and appropriate for their training. I know it took about 10 years after my husband retired from law enforcement before he would sit with his back towards the door. That's not just an anxiety problem. That is a safety problem. That is something that you're trained to do so that you could be aware of your surroundings, right? So we want to make sure that we don't pathologize the normal. Um, and then just symptoms lasting more than 1 month and creating impairment, right? So that impairment can look like a lot of things. We're missing days at work. We're having family problems. We're having increased problems with substance use. So that impairment can look a lot of different ways. But again, this is all something that would be diagnosed by a mental health professional, but just kind of give you an idea of what mental health professionals are looking for when they look for that diagnosis. On Even if you don't reach the PTSD level of things, chronic stress and burnout is a very common problem in first responders and their families. Again, that chronic exposure to high stress situations, right? Some of the symptoms of stress and burnout, again, might mimic a little bit the symptoms of PTSD, but on a lesser scale. Definitely some emotional exhaustion, some challenges with sleep, with depersonalization, which it's just not feeling like like situations are real and that you're in the situation as a firsthand person, but more like you're just observing stuff, right? My husband likes to say there's a period of about 10 years that he doesn't remember because he's just kind of in response mode. And then just a general reduced of a sense of personal accomplishment can be one of the ways in which you're experiencing burnout. Again, that emotional suppression, like, hey, like we don't talk about this kind of stuff. That's one of the worst things we can do. In other words, to prevent chronic stress and burnout, one of the best things we can do is to fight that stigma and fight the desire just to put it all in a box and put it on a shelf, right? And then some faulty thinking patterns that we can get into that increase our stress and burnout. All right, I'm watching the time. I have a lot of information on faulty thinking, and I think I just want to go over it quickly. And Crystal, if it's okay, I'd rather send this part mostly as a handout. Okay, she's nodding her head yes. So I'm going to go through it, but then I think I'm going to have her disseminate a handout on this. All right, but some of the ways in which that we think about things also increases the likelihood that we're going to experience burnout and chronic stress. This is for first responders and family members. This is for all of us. This is psychologists. This is the mailman. This is everybody, right? These are the automatic negative thoughts or the ways in which we have patterned ways of thinking that just don't do us any justice. So some of those, and again, I'm very happy to send that handout, but perfectionism, unrealistic expectations. Well, I should have been able to save so-and-so on the street, or I should have been able to create an environment where my first responder could come home and de-stress, right? So that perfectionism, that's a problematic way. Catastrophizing, everything is a big hairy deal. Everything is the end of the world. All or nothing. You either support me or you don't, right? That there's no in between. I'm gonna send this handout that really helps to look at this. These are automatic ways of thinking. we almost don't even perceive it's happening. This is where working with a mental health professional can be really helpful in identifying what are some of the things that we're doing that's creating more of a challenging way of approaching the stress that we do have. A couple more: overgeneralizing, making details of one event somehow like, well, then all of it's going to be like that. I had a bad time at that one barbecue, so all the bad barbecues, I'm not going to go to any more barbecues, right? Personalizing, that person was a jack, finish that word, to me, and that's about me. Like, what did I do? Well, it could be that the first responder or the family member is just having a bad day, or the supervisor is just having a bad day. Might have taken it out on you, but like just assuming that everything is about us. Not recognize the positive when it does happen. Jumping to conclusions. Tell me one person that hasn't done this in their life, right? And a whole lot of language that we use that's around should, like I should be able to handle this. I should be able to see this stuff, or I should be able to manage my spouse's emotional reactions. A lot of should statements. Those are some TNT dynamite sticks for having chronic stress. Okay. Um, all right, any questions so far? All right, I will get that handout sent to you, Crystal, that you can disseminate to everybody for that. Thank you so much. All right, so we've got some of the things that we can control. Okay, so we can talk in about controlling our faulty thinking. We can talk about the ways in which we use productive and unproductive styles of coping. There's some things that we're not going to be able to control, which is the exposure, right? That's part and parcel for the job. Although there are sort of ways we can do that. You know, it makes sense to look for additional roles in your agency over time. Finding little niche areas that you can do within the agency. That could be one way. But in general, exposure is just kind of part and parcel for the job. But with that faulty thinking, just to kind of dial in a little bit more, we have to recognize when we're engaging in a pattern of thinking. This is probably one of the single, other than the nature of the job, this is probably the other single greatest contributor, I would say, to overwhelm, is the way in which we approach, right? Unfortunately, I think thoughts and feelings, they're all critically important, but none of them necessarily should drive the bus. And what I mean by that is the feelings you have, yeah, sadness, anger, those are important cues. Those are important important feelings, but they shouldn't drive the bus. These automatic negative thoughts, they're also important. I'm not saying they're not important. First of all, they're automatic. You're going to have them. Even I have them from time to time, right? You're going to have them, but it's a matter of recognizing them and not living your daily round around those faulty thinking patterns, right? So again, they don't get to drive the bus. What does drive the bus is a recognition of the thoughts and the feelings, and then having a more rational approach to what am I going to do about it, right? This is something that we can absolutely learn to manage over time. Sometimes we might need a little support in this, but we can absolutely do it. So we got to learn to recognize it, and we've got to look for some support when we need to, and not be defensive about it. By the way, we all do these things, right? So it's very unproductive to be defensive. Like each of us, one of the things that I do with clients in my private practice is sometimes we'll go over what are their faulty thinking patterns and what are their key 1 to 2 that they're like that's their standard way of interacting. Not once have I ever had a client, not once have I ever told a client there isn't a standard 1 or 2, like just a kind of a patterned way of thinking that we've developed over time. But being able to recognize it and then challenge it, right? In a very non-defensive way. But there's no reason to be defensive if we all do this, right? All right. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit. We've talked about more of the role of the first responders, but obviously family members take a toll on this as well. And I would include in family members. Family members are very, very important, but also friends and other social connections. our parents that care about you, maybe even supervisors and peers at work from time to time. So I would include family members broadly, but also some that are more specific to the house that you're living in. I think we can't forget that there is a level of concern for our first responders, family members. Okay, so whether it transcends all the way to fear, but the stress and the strain, and fearing for the safety of the first responder, we can talk ourselves off of that ledge many times, but I think that it's still we're concerned about our first responder loved ones, right? Even the folks that aren't on scene, we're concerned about the continued toll that it takes on our first responders. So that's one of them. Um, Another being just the general emotional strain, right? You guys work stressful jobs, but the family members have some stake in that, and not only what you're doing, but also the way in which we have to kind of manage that pretty acutely at home. It creates some emotional strain for family members too. At times, there's some increased household responsibilities. I know those 5 days on, I was a single parent basically those 5 days, right? Because when they're working, they're at work, and when they're home, they have to sleep, right? So there was no divvying up of responsibilities in that, and that's challenging, especially when I had, both of my kids were colic babies, and boy, keeping the screaming down to a minimum so he could sleep, that was a challenge. And then that vicarious trauma that we talked about before, knowing what your first responder is going to, sometimes they'll share with you, and that's a good thing, but sometimes the level of detail can create trauma for the family member. And so one of the things that we recommend is for first responders is being able to talk to people that really do understand it, right? So peer support in your agency, your supervisors, mental health clinicians that work regularly with first responders that understand what you're going through. That might be a better suited place to really dial into some of the details of an event. But uh, coming home and letting your partner or your spouse know, like, I had a really rough day, I lost one today, or, this happened, and kind of broadly gives context to the family member about what you've been going through. That is important. We don't want to traumatize them, but we absolutely do need to let our family members, otherwise, they can't. Our brain's one job is to make sense of the world, and you have handicapped your partner or your spouse's one job of their brain if they can't make sense of what you're going through when they're trying to understand you and understand what's going on. Okay. Um, All right, so much like what we did before, we're going to kind of run down some of the other initial challenges for family members. If I miss one, do let me know. Okay. Emotional detachment, right? Anybody have a partner or a spouse or first responder dad, or mom or parent, that has just seemed to detach from the family, right? Withdrawing from loved ones is a common thing, and that obviously impacts the family. Being able to connect emotionally, that emotional availability, number one, but then intimacy, number two, just being able to have those conversations. That is one of the serious signs of stress for first responders, family members. And I see that my title slide got messed up a little bit. I apologize for that. Some other ways that we as family members know that we're getting stressed is we can detach too a little bit, right? We can separate ourselves. We can be angry and irritable. We can have increased outbursts, right? Or the outbursts of our partner or spouse can have a significant impact on us. Um, the When our first responder family member is going through what they're going through, and they are on high alert, it can set a higher emotional tone for the household. It sets a higher emotional tone, a critical tone for the children in the household and the partnership in the household. Even if they don't live in the house, or it has that toll on the relationship. um, it can affect a friend of mine, who's in law enforcement. I loved the way that he described it to me one time. He was like, he said, I was the same way at home. I was like, all right, we got to get out of the house and we got to be at the train at this time. So that means we got to leave it. And he said, I made everything a crisis. I made everything critical. And that was a very common complaint among family members for their loved ones, right? Is that we have to constantly be in response mode. And that is exhausting and challenging. Increased substance use problems just create problems in the family, whether it's increased alcohol use, which is tends to be a very, very common one, increased other substance use, and then all of the things that come along with that, secrecy or high risk behavior, high risky behaviors, doing things that aren't characteristically within that person's personality. That can be a challenge too. One of the things that we work with very regularly with family members of first responders and first responders is panic attacks, right? Having these overwhelming anxiety attacks that are very challenging for the first responder, but is also really challenging for the family member to witness, right? And with that higher emotional tone in the household, even the family members can be prone to excess anxiety and excess panic. And then just some of the general sense of depression and sadness and isolation, the toll that it takes on individuals and the family at large. These are things we have to be on the lookout for. These are signs that we are under an intense amount of stress. It's not a bad thing. It's a bad thing if we don't do anything about it. Okay. These things are very common, but we have to address them. Sometimes we see physical symptoms, a lot of headaches, stomach aches, chronic pain, frequent illness. Some of that is due to prolonged stress. Some of it is valid medical origins and etiology, but some of it can be due to chronic stress as well. All right. Was there anything I didn't cover? Did I miss one on this list? No? Right? So just the worry, the exhaustion, the way that it impacts the family. I think one thing I didn't mention as much is sometimes we can see behavior changes in children. Children can't put into words what they are witnessing and what they are sensing, but they react, right? And so until they build up the language and until they build up the conversational tools and the relationship quality with their loved ones, they react from a behavioral standpoint. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Okay. All right. So I hope that I convinced you that all of those things, it is not a terrible thing if it happens. It's just something I want you to be mindful of. I want you to be aware of and build your sensitivity around. If these becomes patterned ways of interacting, we need to know that it's time to intervene. There are some things we can do both in our personal lives and with mental health professionals that will really help to build both our coping with stress, but also our overall resilience. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. Crystal, is there anything in the chat or did anybody have any questions so far before we get into this last part?
No, we haven't seen anything yet.
Okay. So overall emotional expression and connection, again, that stigma of I have to be tough enough to deal with this, or this stuff isn't supposed to bother me, or this stuff isn't bothering me, and these things aren't a problem. That is the opposite of how we cope effectively, right? Not everybody's going to be as emotionally expressive as I am, but we have to be able to talk about our feelings and make those connections in the way that suits us and our personality, right? There's a certain personality type that goes with many first responders. And so it may not look the same way as it does for your spouse or family member, but being able to express that yourself with appropriate communication skills is really, really critical for effective coping in the long run, not only for the first responder, but for the family members as well. Building some of that resilience is some of the key factors in how we do that are things like building your social support network, right? So whether you're a first responder or you're a family member, it is critical for the first responder to have a social support that's bigger than just their family. It's critical for them to have social support that's bigger than just the people in their agency. Because what happens when they leave the agency? What happens when they leave the profession, right? We have to have a varied and diverse social support network. Shockingly, we don't need many really, really close people in our lives, but we do need a few key folks, and it's really good when it's varied. Now, it is helpful to have people that are first responders or family members like us, because then the other person understands, and that's helpful. But we need also other people as well. So building that social support network at home and among peers is one of the biggest things that you can do to build resilience. A lot of first care, or a lot of self-care activities, which I'm going to kind of address at the tail end, um, that also builds that resilience. Being able to take care of oneself outside of stress helps us to better manage stress when it's happening. Um, that is supposed to say mindfulness and relaxation strategies. It looks like my fingers got lazy on that one. So I don't know a lot of first responders that come into my office that are initially very keen on learning mindfulness and relaxation strategies. But when I come at it from the side and maybe not directly on, some of them then are much more interested after we kind of have practiced a few things, and have learned it. One of the apps on the phone that I recommend very commonly is Calm app. Has a lot of mindfulness and guided meditations, things that help, even just white noise to help your loved one or yourself sleep is a big one. But now I'm going to go into sleep specifically. Huge, huge, huge. If you've ever gone over 24 hours without sleep, or 24 hours with only 2 hours of sleep, the effect that it has on our ability to regulate is critical, right? This is so big that I would love to also send one additional handout, Crystal, just on sleep hygiene, because I can do a whole talk just on sleep hygiene, and the way that it affects us. So being mindful of the way in which we approach the sleep time, and the way we approach our behaviors before sleep time, to help us to get into those deeper stages of sleep, which are then more restorative, both physically and emotionally and mentally, for the job that you have to get up and do the next day. Even if that job is, I'm off and I need to be with my family and be normal, right? So even if that's what it is. Um, Nutrition is really important. A lot of times with shift work, I think we fall back on fast food, or maybe less nutritious foods. I will make a plug for avoiding caffeine for anybody who's got panic attacks and excessive anxiety or PTSD. Caffeine and anxiety are mortal enemies, so significantly reducing that is critically important. I had one first responder tell me recently, "You must be crazy." He's like, "How would I get through a shift?" And I was like, "All right, well, can we have one? Can we reduce it?" The effect that caffeine reduction had on diminishing that person's panic attacks was obvious. It was absolutely obvious. So I'll make a plug for not only nutritious foods, but avoid caffeine when you're going through those anxiety and panic attack kinds of symptoms. Exercise and physical activity is that kinesthetic release, that ability to distance oneself from what's going on. So I'm not talking about the exercise related to the job. I'm talking about extracurricular, for lack of a better word, exercise. The power of just getting out, going 15 minutes in one direction for a walk and turning around and coming back, or even 10 minutes. Walks have been shown to be very re-regulating on our nervous system, especially if we go without, like, necessarily with an exercise goal in mind. Like, we're just going just to take a break, right? But exercise in general and having that kinesthetic release is really powerful for re-regulating our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which is what's involved in all the arousal stuff. And then just some general stress management techniques, which I'll get into here in a moment. All right. So we can't really have a webinar on overwhelm without talking about what to do with it. So those are some broad categories that we talked about a little bit more broadly, and how you kind of structure your off time and your on time. but what are some self-care strategies that you can do? So some practical strategies. This is almost like a menu of sorts. And I would love to also include this, Crystal, and anything that I can send out, because although if something jumps out at you, feel free to write it down. This is just a menu. Like, there is not every day that I'm going to want to journal. I pick up my journal at the times that I have absolutely reached that overwhelm and I just need to decompress my thoughts. One of the things that I'll say about journaling for the folks that don't journal, it's not intended. Uh, you don't have to do it every day for it to be effective. It is just free writing your thoughts, right? And here's why it works, or at least this is my theory on why it works. When we think on a hamster wheel. We have the same thoughts over and over and over and over again. When we talk to another person, we talk to be understood, right? So we have our thoughts, but we make them more linear, right? So that the other person understands us. Journaling bridges that gap. So it takes an opportunity for you to take all these free thoughts, get all these brain dump ideas out of your head. And then as you continue on, and it doesn't take more than a few minutes sometimes, as you continue on, you'll notice that it'll start to become more linear and it'll start to distill down what are the key issues that you're facing. Because oftentimes we write to be understood too, right? So journaling is kind of a nice in between to brain dump those thoughts so we get off the hamster wheel, but then we can be understood and it's still private. I am all for take that page and shred it, burn it. I don't care what you do with it. It doesn't have to be found by anybody, but it's the process of journaling that is very therapeutic. Some general other strategies. I'm looking at our time. We're at about an hour and 12 minutes. So I'm just going to go through these a little bit more quickly. Lowering the stakes, what I mean by that is just making sure that you take that moment to dial back and go, all right, how important is this really in the grand scheme of things? Approaching situations that are creating a lot of stress for you and figuring out ways that you can lower the stakes on them. Take, for example, this presentation. I wasn't overwhelmed necessarily by creating the presentation, but knowing this is just one opportunity to talk with you guys, that helps me to lower the stakes so I'm less anxious. Going to this call, you can only do what you can do, right? Helping you to lower the stakes. Breathing, obviously we're breathing all day long, but most of us are breathing from our chest in the daytime, and that's how we're supposed to breathe. At night, when you're at your deepest stage of sleep, we actually breathe more from our diaphragm. So we can actually do a top-down reversal on that, and we can start to breathe from our diaphragm to tell our body to go into a restful state. There's a reason why psychologists really kind of focus on this, but staying in that chest breath can still feel very constricting and can actually lead to a panic attack if we're focused really heavily on shallow chest breaths. Building into that diaphragm. There's some great YouTube videos. I'll put that on the handout as well for diaphragmatic breathing. Sometimes we just have to dial back our responsibilities. We've got to reach out to friends. We got to block out some me time, whether that's going golfing, going hunting, whether that's just, all right, I'm going to take a 3-hour tour around Target and not buy anything. We have to take some me time just to decompress. Screen time is one of those things that the research is pretty clear is not great for us. I would say that if you can put limits on it, 15 to 20 minutes of scrolling, and it's not all the negative stuff. For example, I have no idea why, but my feed has suddenly full with funny animals, and I think that's great. It's a nice little break, but anything more than about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'm hitting all those neurons like Instagram and some of the other things. They are designed in a way that activates the brain that has very addictive qualities, and they were designed that way. If you ever watched the documentary Social Dilemma, it explains it all. So really got to put limits on it. But I think as an initial distraction, just for me to take a moment is okay. Anything more than about 10 or 15 minutes is not great. We've already talked about going for a walk, having grace for yourself. I'm hoping that everything that we talked about today up to this point gives you all the data you need to suggest why you should have grace for yourself and for your first responder loved one. right? Or the first responders that you work with, right? This is a hard, hard profession. This is a hard, hard walk for a family member. And so I think having grace is really important. Um, Gratitude, being able to say, that was a really hard shift, but I really appreciated that so and so was on that call with me. I really appreciated that my spouse took care of the kids. I really appreciated that my spouse goes to work and does this hard work for our community. Being able to really focus in on gratitude. Having some playtime, that kind of goes to time blocking for sanity, just taking that time for you. Developing a hobby. Again, I know first responder community is not the best paid jobs in the world. So we have to be careful sometimes of what hobbies we choose, but having your own hobby and having your own thing that you can do that you can retreat productively to and then re-engage productively with your families. And then last but not least, your own professional cheerleader. That's kind of like the thing that I do, right? And so working with first responders and their family members. I do think it's important that, although I think a lot of mental health professionals can be very good for first responder communities, I think it tends to be a little bit more effective if you can find one that understands the community. A huge shout out to Second Alarm Project. If you don't know who in the world that could be, they could hook you up with somebody, right? So being able to do that. There are a lot of, let's see if it's on actually the next, but yeah, it's on the next slide. So there are a lot of resources for that support. Again, Second Alarm Project can help you to identify that. One of the missions of Second Alarm Project is to connect first responders and their family members with resources, right? So actually Second Alarm should be the very first thing up there. I apologize. The next one is workplace programs, EAP programs, employee assistance programs. A lot of the agencies, not as much as the smaller agencies, but a lot of the larger agencies, you can see a mental health professional that is contracted with that agency that understands the culture, up to 4 or 5 sessions, right? And that will just kind of get you in and get you started. Your human resources, your HR person can help to refer you to some places that they refer to, even outside of EAP. One thing, a shout out to EAP programs, the ones that I am a provider for, not once have they ever come back and said, all right, well, who showed up? What was the problem? What happened? They've never asked for additional details, right? It is confidential. And being able, this is the voluntary EAP, it is confidential and I'm able to work with that person. So sometimes the mental health community, it can take a really long time to get an appointment with someone on your insurance. This could be a great stopgap to get you seen by someone early on and someone that understands the culture. Family support networks, the work that Crystal does in kind of getting first responder and their family communities together. I think that's really important. Again, people who walk the walk every day, the people that understand what it is that you're going through, it's just a little easier sometimes to share your heart. We're not going to find all of our best friends in these programs, but just knowing that you're in a community of people that understand what you go through can be a great first step, right? I hopefully highlighted for you guys that social support is so important. Professional resources outside of EAP, outside of HR referrals, just contacting a mental health professional can be really helpful. Providing those opportunities for you to have your own professional cheerleader, someone who's in your corner, someone who is not your best friend, is going to tell you everything you're doing is wonderful, but is someone who is going to tell you like, hey, look, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And be able to challenge you and encourage you to live a more adaptive lifestyle. And then when the poop hits the fan, 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, right? That is a confidential lifeline. The risk for suicide is so much higher in first responder careers than in other careers. Being able to call and talk to someone confidentially. In case you're worried about whether or not law enforcement or your peers are going to show up to your house, less than 3% of their calls require any immediate intervention. So if it's between preserving your life and having a less than 3% chance of having to make it known to a colleague that you need help, I'm going to go with preserving your life always. Okay. Hopefully we don't get that far, but that is a lifeline that's available to you. Okay. Self-care isn't selfish, just a reminder. It's part of it. All right. I told you I could talk forever. I could have expanded any one of those things for a long time and done a much deeper dive on any of that. I think the more that we spend attention and time on this community that then, or on this community of first responders and their families that then serves the broader community, we are doing good. The risk of mental health problems in the first responder community is just so high. So I really hope that I provided some information that maybe was new to you or a little bit different of an angle on that information. And I just want to open it up for any questions or any comments.
I'm going to go ahead and stop recording so that we can ask questions without it being on the recording. So let's see.